Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. The Metropolitan Police officer arrested over the death of Sarah Everard pleads guilty to her murder. New Scotland Yard reacts.
And everyone in policing feels betrayed.
New research into the impact of COVID-19 on children suggests very few children need to shield from the virus. And as Beijing extends its economic noose around countries it's upset with, one China expert tells us its bark is worse than its bite. The Metropolitan Police officer arrested over the death of Sarah Everard has admitted to her murder. Wayne Couzens had previously admitted to rape and kidnap. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick expressed the force's reaction.
All of us in the Met are sickened, angered and devastated by this man's crimes. They are dreadful. And everyone in policing feels betrayed.
Everard was abducted as she walked home from a friend's house in South London on the 3rd of March. Her body was later found in woodland around 50 miles away. The Met Police's senior investigator in the case has apologised wholeheartedly after the force put out a press release revealing her alleged cause of death before it had been considered by the defence. Meanwhile, the police watchdog has received a string of referrals relating to the Couzens case, with 12 police officers under investigation for misconduct. And in other news, the risk of severe illness or death from the CCP virus is extremely low in children and young people. That's according to new findings by researchers from several major UK universities. NTD's Eddie Aitken brings us this report.
The risk of severe illness or death from the CCP virus, also known as COVID-19, is extremely low in children and young people, according to new research. The study found that while catching the CCP virus increased the likelihood of serious illness in those with pre-existing medical conditions and severe disabilities, the overall risk remained low. According to the study from March 2020 to February 2021, nearly 470,000 children and young people were infected with the virus, but only 251 of them were admitted to intensive care, and just 25 of them died from it. Russell Viner, a professor at University College London, says there's a general feeling amongst paediatricians that too many children were shielded in the first wave of the pandemic. He says there's probably very few children who need to shield, judging from the new data. Dr. Liz Whittaker at Imperial College London says the vast majority of children would gain much greater benefits from being in society and going to school. She says those benefits far outweigh any potential risk of becoming severely unwell with COVID. The new findings have been sent to the government and the World Health Organization to inform vaccine and shielding policy for under 18s. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Britain, the United States and a coalition of 19 other nations say they are concerned that further legislation in Hong Kong could be used to curtail media freedom. The coalition expressed strong concerns about the forced closure of the Apple Daily newspaper and the arrest of its staff. It said the use of the national security law to suppress journalism is a serious and negative step which undermines Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and the rights and freedoms of people in Hong Kong. The action against Apple Daily comes against a backdrop of increased media censorship in Hong Kong. And in other news, the CEO of the Port of Dover warns that British tourists returning from their European holidays may face long queues as a result of post-Brexit border checks. NTD's Eddie Aitken has this story.
Since the Brexit transition period ended in January, the Port of Dover has not faced major disruptions as a result of the newly imposed border checks. But according to the port's CEO, that's because the pandemic prevented British tourists from driving to France and reduced the flow of vehicles.
Now, we've been processing very well since the end of the transition period. Primarily, though, however, that's because we haven't seen the demand for tourists coming through our facilities as we would normally expect to see.
But on Thursday, the government dropped a quarantine requirement for fully vaccinated Britons travelling back to the UK. As a result, the number of vehicles travelling through Dover is expected to increase during the summer months, but the port's ability to handle large numbers of vehicles has been reduced by Brexit.
Now, before we left the European Union, then we'd have a better ability to have a smooth process going through the port. However, with the incremental passport checks that need to take place now, it will slow things down.
Dover had applied to the government for funding to adapt the port for the additional checks it needs to make, but the application was rejected. Now it's asking again, saying it's only logical that the government fund the redevelopment, because the customs checks are a result of the Brexit deal it signed. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
As the Chinese Communist Party continues its campaign of economic coercion, particularly singling out Australia, China expert Charles Parton says policymakers should keep in mind that Beijing's bark is worse than its economic bite. NTD's Jane Worrell brings us this report.
Beijing appears to be extending its economic noose around countries it's upset with. Australia is one of those examples. But what's the actual economic impact? Charles Parton, who spent 22 years of his diplomatic career working on or in China, writes in his latest report that economic threats from China are often exaggerated, as are the benefits of Chinese investment.
If you look at trade in the past on countries that have been in the sort of diplomatic doghouse, whether that's sort of Korea, Norway, Australia, Canada, I mean, the list is growing by the month. All those countries' trade in those years in which they were in the doghouse grew. There's one or two very small exceptions, but generally China's exports to China for all countries, whether in the doghouse or not, fell slightly in 2015-16. But generally, these countries are not affected. It's largely a propaganda exercise, and politicians should see behind that.
Do you think politicians are able to see through that now?
Well, it's a process one hopes of gradually seeing things more clearly. But even in the press, you will see, as I have done in recent weeks, a number of occasions which, I mean, the Times talked about the ruinous sanctions that China was inflicting on Australia. Well, Australia's exports to China this year hardly dipped at all, and don't forget we're in a period of COVID, etc. So it's greatly exaggerated.
Chancellor Rishi Sunak recently said that he's confident the UK could have an economic relationship with China in a safe, mutually beneficial way without compromising our values or security.
When Mr. Rishi Sunak talks about the values and the security, there will be some direct confrontations where I think the British government, as I say, needs to see behind the political bark and actually realise that the economic bite is not nearly as painful as people say. But there will be some economic price. I don't deny that. But the question that I think we have to ask ourselves, and which the original golden era policy, which was run from the Treasury by one of Mr. Sunak's predecessors, George Osborne, the question you have to ask yourself is, what price your security and your values? Are they worth paying a smallish price to defend? And the answer for that is surely, yes, they are.
Parton says while liberal democracies are beginning to see the nature of the Chinese Communist Party more clearly, the UK is yet to settle on a China strategy. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Wembley Stadium is hosting its sixth and final Euro 2020 Championship match on Sunday. For local businesses, returning fans have been a welcome boost after 16 months of virus restrictions. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the story.
Football's coming home. The Euro 2020 Championship final will be held in London this weekend, where England's team has a chance of winning. For local businesses around Wembley Stadium, the recent flux of business is much welcomed.
We had lots of regulars, lots of England supporters, and it's great. The Wembley come in and it's just a great vibe. Just a great vibe.
The cafe manager says during the pandemic, he spent some time open with shadow staff and claimed government support. London's iconic Wembley Stadium draws in sports fans and is a top venue for music tours.
But then again, after this, we've only got 2 more events, and then a lot of shows have been cancelled, but as a spectacle, having the Euros at Wembley Stadium, but it just lifts the people up, and it's something I think we needed in this country.
Just a few music events are scheduled for August, but he's looking forward to seeing his regular customers come back when social distancing and mask mandates are dropped on July the 19th. The 90,000-seater stadium has been mostly empty the last 16 months before the tournament. One local business that has been running for more than 140 years is glad to be open.
It seems more special because people haven't been out. People are meeting up with people. Like a lot of the England fans that go to every game haven't seen each other for a year, and they're meeting up with people again. And it's good time. It's been very emotional. This has, in a good way, not in a bad way.
London's Wembley Stadium will host the Euro 2020 final on Sunday. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
The EU just fined BMW, Volkswagen and others £750 million. It says the companies colluded to curb the use of pollution technologies. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the details.
The European Commission just fined Volkswagen, BMW and others £750 million. It says they colluded to limit the development of car emission control systems.
Today, the Commission took a decision against 5 car manufacturers, Daimler, BMW, as well as Volkswagen, Audi and Porsche, which are part of the Volkswagen Group.
While Daimler was part of the collusion, it was able to avoid the fine. The car maker was first to tell the EU about the cartel. Regulators say the companies curbed the use of emissions cleaning technology.
All citizens must be able to trust that car manufacturers compete with one another. Also, when it comes to reducing harmful emissions from the cars.
Vestager says the car makers failed to meet these expectations. Although they had the technology to reduce emissions further, they didn't. Instead, the companies avoided competing on this technology. She says the car makers agreed on the tank sizes for the AdBlue solution. The fluid can limit pollution from diesel engines, and a bigger tank would enable more pollution reduction.
They also exchanged sensitive information about envisaged AdBlue tank sizes, ranges and average AdBlue consumption of future car models.
It's the first time the European Commission has fined companies for holding back on using technology, instead of more traditional practices like price fixing. Volkswagen is considering legal action because it says the EU is treating technical cooperation as an antitrust violation. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Still to come, France considers mandatory vaccinations for health workers as a threat of a 4th COVID wave in the country looms. That and more when we return. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.